head of community at Lawtrades. If you don't know what Lawtrades is, we're a legal tech company that helps busy GCs with flexible on-demand legal talent, not just lawyers, but legal ops professionals, paralegals, contract managers, what have you. Today, we're here with a very, very topical topic, definitely in the news, and we're talking about economic downturns. Specifically, we're talking about how legal can prepare for an economic downturn. I have with me stellar guests. I have Eric, Matt, and Jared. If you guys don't mind introducing yourselves, I'll start with Eric.
Hi, Eric Fisher. I am Deputy General Counsel at GoPuff, Instant Needs Grocery Last Mile Delivery.
Awesome, Matt.
Matt Lubniewski. I'm Associate General Counsel at Zynga, mobile game developer based in the Bay Area.
And Jared.
Jared Mermelstein, Deputy General Counsel at Evergreen Trading. We're a New York-based media, finance, and ad tech company.
Awesome. Guys, again, this is a very, serious topic. I normally I joke and make crazy jokes, but this is obviously something I don't want to necessarily joke about today. I really want to I kind of hone in. So I think my first question for everyone here is, do you have experience being legal in an economic downturn?
Yeah.
Sure, Eric.
I'll start. So in the 2002, 2008 recessions, I was in various law firms. So I saw it from the outside firm perspective. And then while it wasn't technically a recession, I was in the live entertainment industry during COVID, which effectively revenue went from here to zero in a day. So yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have experience not from a legal position, but from a management position back in the 2008 downturn. I was doing event and concert production, which whenever there's a downturn, those are the expenses that get cut first from your budget. So from a management perspective, I do have that experience. This is my first time, hopefully my last time going through it from the legal side.
Matt.
Yeah, I started my career in 2008 at a firm doing bankruptcy, mortgage foreclosure, commercial workouts. And so, that's kind of shaped my whole legal career, honestly, and thinking about when things aren't good and, when times are good, I still have that banging around in my head about what if the sky falls and what do we do? What does our contract say? What do we really care about? That sort of thing. So, can't get away from it a little bit. It's just I think it'll kind of haunt a lot of us that started our legal career then.
I couldn't agree more, especially I think if you started your career in COVID too. I mean, that was probably everyone's first thought was, how do I keep, if we're talking strictly in private practice, how do I stay profitable? How do I stay profitable? And in an in-house sense, how do I not be viewed as enough of a cost where I'm a cost that needs to go? So I think my second question technically to y'all is, what is the role of legal in an economic downturn? Or at least what would you say the role is?
I'll start off. Sure. I think that as an attorney, especially an in-house attorney during an economic downturn, it's about making sound business recommendations based on your legal assessment, right? Our job as lawyers are to mitigate risk. Obviously, during economic downturn, companies focus even more heavily on minimizing costs while maximizing revenue. As all the attorneys on this call will attest, it's very often, lawyers are thought of as a non-revenue generating expense.
Yeah.
But so it's an interesting balance between wanting to keep your own job, right? And also, having to really provide advice based on what's best for the company and how to mitigate the risk associated with this downturn.
Agreed.
Yeah, I would say like my role is transactional. So when the going is good and money is flowing, there's not a lot of concern about termination for convenience and revenue recognition. And I mean, it does matter, but sometimes the business folks are not as focused on that in the good times. And so a lot of my thought these days is just tactically, how do we get out of things? How do we stay flexible, or even just be able to present that to put the business person in a position to look good, that they've thought about this ahead of time, even if there's no intention of exercising. Just having that flexibility and knowing what your flexibility is critical. So I think sometimes when things are good, people can sometimes go a little bit on autopilot and not be focused on when things go bad, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Jared and Matt said. I guess I would add that a lot of times our role, not necessarily by design, but just by the nature of how our jobs are day to day, is to see how all the pieces fit together across the organization. And so in troubling times, a role that we may have to play is to tell one client, well, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't be doing X, Y, or Z, because on the other side of the house, we're thinking about cutting back on this or that. And, the left hand doesn't always know what the right hand is doing. And so, sometimes our role is to make sure that the problems don't compound on themselves by the business continuing to go down roads on one hand, while on the other hand, they're not.
Right.
That's an incredible
to flesh that out a little bit more, what Matt said and Eric as well is, you have to review your existing agreements with your vendors, with your clients, to assess potential liability, the value of the partner, the commitment level. Will that partner still be available to pay you, right? Will they have cash flow to pay you in 6 months from now? What are our obligations under the agreement? Are there flexible payment terms? Maybe we want to renegotiate and go back to the table and say, listen, partner, this has been great, but we see the writing on the walls, and in order to move forward the way we expect it to, we really need a 10% decrease in these billings, things like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the other side of this is that it's an economic downturn that applies across sort of at the macro level. At any one company, your company might be perfectly healthy. It could even be thriving, right? Like during COVID, my live entertainment company was doing nothing, but there were plenty of other companies that were growing by leaps and bounds. And so it might be, to Jared's point, things are gangbusters in your job at your company, but your role as a lawyer is to, sort of pressure test the counterparties.
Yeah. That's a valid point. I think, Matt, we've spoken about this in the past as well, and it's and I'll ask everyone, a bit of a side question, but is that something that I guess front of mind where you're thinking, okay, I like the terms of this contract, but is this vendor going to be here long term? I wonder, do you guys ask that question, especially in economic downturns, or at least you see it coming? You're like, well, is this a vendor I want to work with only because will they exist?
100%. Yeah. I mean, that's something that, depending on the motivations of the business person you're representing, their directive might be to do this as cheap as possible, as quickly as possible. And, if the counterparty, let's say they're a venture-backed startup, no regulation, no board, or excuse me, no shareholders to answer to, that sort of thing, and they can just give you what you want, that might not be the best result for the company. Maybe the better result sometimes is to pick the more expensive incumbent provider, especially if it's a critical business system, that you want to make sure they're going to be around, not just ones that can accommodate your negotiation, right? And I think taking that strategic mindset is extremely important. I'm partially in the ad tech space as well, Jared, and I know that's just an area of extreme dynamism and people coming and going. And so, if someone's going to owe you millions of dollars for purchasing ads or providing a critical service in your stack to deliver advertising, or to purchase advertising, you really got to think about, is this someone that's going to be around in a year?
Yeah. We're definitely spending more time doing credit checks, background checks, see how healthy of an organization we're about to partner with, because we do deal with financing and credit. So it is, we don't want to be holding the bag if, we're acting as agents for another party and we're purchasing ads on their behalf. Of course, we have mechanisms within the contract that really protect us from that. But when push comes to shove, we also don't want to piss off our media vendors. So we have to worry about those relationships as well, not just we're liable for the payments, but also we need to keep healthy relationships with these vendors.
So, yeah, and I think the only other area where I had been laser focused on this, and not necessarily in this downturn, but in a former life, was in tech deals and getting source code put into escrow because we needed that source code to get the value of the technology we were buying. And if the company, went belly up and the source code was just another asset that was subject to creditors, that was going to be a real problem for us.
That's fascinating. That's something I never thought of.
Me neither.
That's cool. I have a similar experience, but with architects. I in a previous life, were making sure that I had CAD files in the same vein, where if the architect had busted, when, to your point, like if people stopped constructing, like COVID is a perfect example. Like, do I at least still own these plans that if things come back, I can use them in the future? That's a very, as an aside, me geeking out, that's really interesting, honestly. So, well, and this is, I think this is also me being selfish, and this is probably a stupid question, but I can only fathom how many people listening, or you guys yourselves, were analyzing force majeure clauses in contracts during COVID, especially, is probably the best example. I know I was, and that was probably one of my biggest roles was, and I think to Matt's point was, is someone going to trigger the force majeure against me, and how's that going to look? And on the flip, do I have to trigger the force majeure to get out of something? And that was a value added, I guess, part of my role, right? It was definitely something I didn't anticipate until we were in an economic issue, an economic downturn. So, I'm going to back up a bit, and because I think this is probably another issue that folks face. Like, we're not in an economic downturn, but everyone here has faced it in some way, shape, or form. I guess, are there ways to prepare? Maybe it's not on the horizon, but it seems like it's on the horizon. Are there things that y'all have done or that you think about to prepare for an economic downturn?
I mean, the preparation, I think, is the same always, right? I think that people's appetite for risk changes. Sure. But the preparation is, again, you want to minimize costs, maximize revenue, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, one way that Evergreen Trading does that and adds value for our clients is we allow our clients to use their excess assets, right? Assets that they're no longer using. They can use them at their book value, which is greater than their market value, which oftentimes, it's last year's season and there is no real market value. But we let them use those assets in a way that finances their advertising, which is a revenue generating endeavor, right? So that we can actually, so that's one way of just, different, but just business as usual, find creative ways to take this liability, this weight on your books, and use it for something that can generate revenue and bring you a return. So that's something that we do at Evergreen. But you're constantly wanting to bring up risks, right? By the time the risk is here, it's almost too late, right? You don't want to be reactive to an economic. You don't want to be like, holy shit, we're in a recession. Sorry, excuse me. You're good. You gotta keep your eyes open.
I didn't think I'd laugh during this.
and always look towards the future. And I see a question about C-suites that don't want to listen. Oftentimes they don't, especially when the economy is booming, right? Because your appetite for risk is much greater. There might be a risk today that you're not willing to take that 6 months ago you wouldn't have even thought about it. You would have been like, yeah, let's do it, right? So It's constantly having your fingers on the pulse of the business in both a micro and a macro sense. And even when your C-suites don't want to hear it, it's telling them anyway, right? They might not listen, but you have to, you can't be caught being like, oh, I didn't mention it because I didn't think you wanted to hear it situation.
Yeah. And I would add to that just because you took a risk 6 months ago that you wouldn't take today doesn't mean that it was a mistake 6 months ago.
Agree. Yeah.
Right? I mean, 6 months ago, investors, the market, Wall Street, whatever, was rewarding, fast, crazy growth at the end, and was sort of relatively indifferent to EBITDA growth.
Mm-hmm.
They just wanted to see revenue growth. They didn't necessarily care as much about profitability, and that just changed on a dime, right? And so it's just a different way of looking at things. I think, to answer your question about how to prepare, unfortunately, if you wait until the downturn started to start preparing, there is no way to prepare, right?
Yeah,
You
exactly.
can prepare to do a lot of work, but you can't prepare for the downturn itself, right? Like, you get, right? Sleep deprivation training is how to prepare at this point.
Guys, I'm not supposed to laugh during this.
Serious stuff.
No, but it's a fair point. I think that's an incredibly fair point. It's if you wait, I mean, that's right. It makes the most sense to me. I mean, we're constantly the risk management side of the business. I mean, we're obviously a strategic business advisor as well, but if you're risk management planning at the end, that is not risk management planning. You're out. So I couldn't agree more. And this is interesting. This is not a question, but I think it leads to a good question. Someone had made a comment to us that balancing risk is in the good times is tough when trying not to be seen as the Department of No. So, I mean, I agree with that. I guess the question I have is there a way to balance risk without being seen as the Department of No? And we're not talking, it looks like not talking like in a downturn, we're talking preparing for. And that might have been the longest winded question I've ever asked.
No, I mean, I think that's kind of the question that almost every modern legal team is faced with. And because people have been at other companies where they've had a good experience with legal and it wasn't just a Department of No. And I think that's more of the expectation, frankly, these days, is that there's a predisposition towards trying to get to yes. And so for me, that just starts with like understanding your business and what the existential risks are and what the legal risks are that your business faces. And, in mobile gaming, it's a very different risk profile from Boeing, right? Or you're manufacturing ventilators, right? So like just knowing where that line is for yourself, even if it never comes up, that's just what I just ask myself every day is, what's the worst that can happen? And, I'm luckily in an industry where we get probably a little more latitude to be the Department of Yes. So I'd be curious to hear from other folks if they've butted up against that line because of your industry.
Yes, I think you always butt up against it to a certain extent, but I think I think you're exactly right. It's all about making sure the client understands that you want to get them to achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve. And you may have to get there. You may have to take a different path than what they had initially proposed to you, but you're going to help them find that path. And then there are other times where you are the Department of, no, you're not the Department of No, you're the Department of, here's the risk, here's the downside. And You're the business person, you're the business leader, you're the C-suite. You just need to know what the risks of doing this are, but then, feel free to do it.
Right. And Eric, that's a great point, right? We're not, we're here to point out risks and to mitigate risks. Everything has a risk. We're never going to get, if it's, I need 100% certainty or else it's a no, you're going to be the Department of No, because that's the only option you have, right? So it's assessing, right? It's assessing not only what the worst thing that can happen is if we do this, but also what is the likelihood of that horrible thing happening, right? And then bringing that information to your business team and having conversations with them. Something else Eric mentioned that I want to touch upon is that oftentimes there are creative ways to get to yes that, again, doesn't, I might not be able to give you exactly what you want, but I can give you enough that it'll still accomplish the goal that we're looking to accomplish. So I can get to yes while still mitigating some of those risks by being creative in my problem solving, in my drafting, and by being transparent and open and communicative with my business teams.
It's a really good point. And that's probably the answer to that question. I mean, well, not question, but comment. I mean, being creative with getting to yes, and you're right, not giving on certain risk points and holding back at some level, but everyone feels at least like they've gotten something in the transaction, something in the conversation, the negotiation. I think that's huge in planning for an economic downturn, or not planning for, but at least being, it's still like back of mind, and you're still doing things to make sure in the event that things go south, we've planned accordingly, because I didn't quite say yes, but I said yes with these guardrails in place. So in the event of something going bad, guys, it's all right, because we planned accordingly for this. So I think that's a very valid point.
But that also speaks to the need to be as tightly tied to your clients as possible and understand the business. And because I've been in situations where we could have solved the client's problem had they come to us sooner, but they got too far down the wrong road, and now we were sort of boxed into something where we had to be the no. But had they looped us in 2 weeks earlier, we would have gone a different way and gotten to yes.
I know that feeling. I've been there. I've got something in my head. I'm not allowed to say that publicly right here, but yes, I understand that completely. So let's progress a little bit. So we're in an economic downturn. What can legal do? I hate to say show value, because obviously we show value every day. We're legal. That's why they hired us. But I guess, what are things that legal can do to be strategic, to continue to add value and not be viewed as necessarily as much of a cost?
I mean, I can speak to my approach, which is the same. It's kind of like what Jared was saying earlier. Like, the downturn really doesn't have a lot to do with it. It's finding ways to quantify your work as easy as you can without turning it into a law firm, right? Where you're billing time and it's like so discreetly quantifiable. But having things like an intake process, having some rudimentary data around productivity, so you can show quarter over quarter, year over year, where you're at relative to where the business is at. And I think just having that information, it might not still result in a decision that you want from a headcount planning or budgetary planning standpoint, but maybe it will, right? If you can show that you've been doing more with less already, and you're maybe not benchmarked against where the business should be from a revenue standpoint, like haven't grown with the business, then maybe that adds another layer of decision making for the person that's looking at headcount and things like that, or whether to outsource or hire someone. I think that those are just kind of, and there's some low tech ways to do that if you can just bake it into part of your process where it isn't an overly burdensome, matter number kind of situation.
Billing 0.6, billing 0.7.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, our C levels, it's hard to quantify without the billable hours, right? But like Matt said, adding process efficiencies, whether it's contract systems and procedures, or giving other people on your team a little more freedom, or even on your business team a little more freedom to send out this NDA, just let me know about it. But that's an efficiency that that takes me away not only from what I was doing, but any other requests that are coming in during that same 15 minutes. There's an opportunity cost there. Another way of doing it, nobody's going to promote your team, your legal team, and yourself as well as you will, right?
Yeah.
Don't be shy. Point out your big wins, right? Like, I closed the biggest deal we've ever seen, and it was a great thing by business, but like, I brought it over the finish line. Look what that deal is doing for the company, right?
Yeah.
So that's definitely, I would prioritize in discussions with our C-suite, revenue generating opportunities and relationships that I'm cultivating. Mm-hmm. And then self-critique, right? Because they're not going to believe that you don't do anything wrong, right? But self-critique, present issues of waste, hey, we're reaching out to outside counsel here for this issue when you're already paying me a salary. I could research this for an hour and get you the same result, right? So there, in every legal department I've been in, there is waste. right? Some more than others.
Mm-hmm.
Where I am now at Evergreen, we have a very tight team. So I would say that it's less than in some of my previous roles. But those things are important to point out too. So you're not just, only presenting the best of what you do, right? You want to say that, listen, I'm really analyzing my own work and I'm seeing where I could do better and where I can save the company money by doing so.
Interesting.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, to a certain extent, tightening your own team's belt is necessary, but that's also kind of like table stakes. I have to assume that all of the other departments are being asked to similarly tighten their belts.
Mm-hmm.
What I did in a former life, when the legal department owned sort of the cross-functional endeavor to look at every single contract, figure out what we could get out of, figure out how quickly we could get out of it, figure out what it would cost us to get out of,
Sure.
and then, work with the business, which often meant cracking the whip on the business to sort of drive them towards getting out of those contracts. Like, legal will paper it, but you have the relationship with these people. You need to call, and maintaining the master spreadsheet, and then sort of waving that around. I mean, look how great we are. Look at what we just did. I don't love the self-preservation aspect of that, but it was important work and we did do it. So we had to make sure that, it was known that we did it.
That's fair. I think sometimes business forgets. I've had that happen before where one day I'd bring something up and my C-suite would say, you handle XYZ, be like, yes, and not to say there wasn't a great line of communication, but when you're thinking about potentially making sure you're not doing big cuts or making sure that the business is remaining profitable, you forget about not want to say the little things, but the things that everyone else is doing. So I think I agree with you, Eric, completely. Like, it also feels weird to like act in that way because it is self-preservation. And it's I don't want to say it's selfish, but it's a little bit like, hey, this is me. This is about us. This is about my legal department, not necessarily about the company. But at some level, it's great because it also reminds folks that don't know what you're doing, what you're doing. Because sometimes they forget. At least that was my perspective. Granted, it's where I come from. I come from a department also that loved data. I kind of want to ask about you guys. So, do you typically utilize data as well, showing what you're doing? And when I say data, I mean like contracts executed or savings or what have you. So let me ask you that in terms of data.
Yeah, I mean, my team set up a contract management system that just captures a lot of data.
Sure.
And the trick sometimes is like, what are the insights you can get out of it? Is it meaningful? And so it's been interesting. Like, you put on paper, I'm going to track 150 different data points, and you realize like half of those were a waste of time. And but then there are really tactical things that are helpful. Like, is it our paper or the counterparty's paper? Who is originating this business? And then you can start to look at trends. The time to signature is being influenced by one of those factors. And that's really powerful because then you can start to say, hey, we're spending too much time in this low risk area. Let's change it. Let's tweak it. So there's a new form or a de minimis policy or, whatever is appropriate for business. I found that really useful. Granted, we've only had maybe a year of that really strong performance metric data around how the team's working, but it's been pretty simple just to be able to show leadership and say, this is a year over year increase. This department is showing an increase in contract volume, and it's in this subject matter area. Therefore, we need to focus hiring in this particular area. And some of the newer tools make it pretty easy and often have like an out of the box solution where they can just tell you like, this is your percentage of counterparty paper versus internal paper. And, we found situations where a business had that kind of out of whack metric. And, if you start doing some workflow automation, document automation, you can engineer some time out of your process. It's a little bit dangerous to go down that road because then you're sort of inviting operations and business-minded folks into what can sometimes seem like a mystical process of being a lawyer and legal professional. So I mean, there is a balance there, I think, of maintaining your autonomy, right, as a legal team, and having that integrity to not be kind of second guessed and have your existence questioned, but demonstrating that you're bringing value and you're thinking about that and you're taking an operational mindset, I think is going to be the status quo going forward. It just will not be tolerated to be this kind of mystical pillar of knowledge that exists separate from the business. That's gone. That's over.
Oh yeah.
I'm just really impressed that of the 150 data points that you're collecting, that you only found half of them to be unnecessary.
True.
I know, I'm tracking like 5. Making me look bad, Matt.
Well, to be fair, a lot of this is just like, we're not doing anything. It's just set up and the user enters a name or something. So yeah, I don't want to be too peacocky over here about it.
Well, I kind of want to bounce back to a question, not a question, but a comment, Jared, you had made, but I guess it's in the same vein, right? Quantifying, you could quantify how much outside counsel spends, right? We all know how much outside counsel spends. I guess when we're in an economic downturn, are you seeing in-house counsel taking over a lot of the slack that maybe outside counsel was handling? Are you seeing renegotiations of rates? What is that like?
I'm seeing both of those things, right? Definitely renegotiation of rates, definitely taking advantage of smaller firms. Mm-hmm. You don't always, not everything needs, the top echelon, top billing firms, right? There are plenty of things that might be outside your wheelhouse as a general counsel that, is very adequate to get that mid-range firm to help you out. The risk is low and it lowers your costs. So there's definitely renegotiations. There's definitely utilization of other firms and even solo practices that you may not have been utilizing in the past. You just, okay, we have this firm on retainer. We're going to send everything to this big firm and they're going to do the job no matter how big or how small the job is. Now we're assessing a little bit more. If it's a smaller job, we could use a smaller firm. Smaller firm, less billables, lower billable hour. Something else that I think is invaluable is start building up your skill set, right? If there's something that you find is coming across your desk that you're constantly reaching out to outside counsel for, maybe take a CLE in it. Maybe, take or some other class or way of gaining knowledge and expertise, right? Oh, you're not an intellectual property wizard. Well, start reading some intellectual property books, right?
Figure it out.
Data protection is huge right now, right? Like, you don't understand it. Maybe you should have at least an elementary understanding of it. So, any complex big issues, you go to your outside counsel. But if you're arguing over the definition of personal identifiable information, like that's a waste of money to go to your outside counsel. Like, there's resources, but most companies have them, but also that you can find on your own that would really add invaluable skills to your repertoire, which, helps you in 2 ways, right? It helps the company as you're minimizing costs, and it helps you as being someone who's now adding value that was not previously there.
So related to that, and I love all of that, but cross-train your team,
yes.
right? So if your company is caught up in the downturn and you have lawyers on the team that are M&A lawyers for all the business development that you were planning on doing, that might dry up. And then what could your M&A lawyers be doing to help out in the departments that, are having the flip experience, right? So, there's going to be teams of commercial lawyers that are trying to get out of thousands of contracts. Can your M&A lawyers be trained up to help with that? In my former life, when COVID hit, certain departments went silent and other departments had never been busier. And in a very siloed legal department, that's a problem. And in one where teams are cross-trained so that everyone could pitch in on everything else, you could really sort of smooth out a lot of that lumpiness. And I mean, just for thinking beyond the downturn, I would say that that's a tremendous retention tool and growth tool in terms of keeping people on your team, keeping them interested, keeping them learning, keeping them hungry for more, is having that ability to give them different work.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I would say this, younger attorneys that want to go in-house, if they're given the ability to be utility players, plug and play, for me, that would have been incredibly appealing. For most, it's incredibly appealing, just as a retention tool. But I couldn't agree more. What about for outside counsel, Eric or Matt? Do you have any? I guess, do you negotiate with outside counsel to get better rates?
I agree with everything Jared said. We negotiate for better rates. We've reconsidered where to send work, whether it's big firm versus small firm, or geography, because some geographies are just less expensive than others. So everything's on the table.
Yeah, I agree with everything Eric and Jared said. I tend to think a lot about where is an outside counsel spend going to be a force multiplier versus a net reduction in output if we were to keep it in-house. Because if you're spending half the time explaining how your business works and what the history of the property that you're negotiating a lease for or something, well, not only have I spent all the money and spent my time, and I maybe have gotten even a worse work product because of the lack of context. So just being a little more strategic about where we're going to spend the money, and knowing what your team knows. So in-house folks tend to be generalists and are willing to take on things that are maybe slightly outside of their scope of core competency. And that might not always be the right decision. If there's a highly, for example, real-time bidding in digital advertising is a highly complex area, and it's not something you can just dabble in, even if the pressures of the in-house environment might kind of force someone into that. So things like that, or data privacy, that are more complex, changes in European law, for example, where you've got one law firm that's seeing how 50 companies are reacting to new standard contractual clauses or something like that. That's a force multiplier versus us reinventing the wheel in-house, looking at practical law and trying to bang our heads against the wall.
That's a fair point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess this is more of an opinion question, but we're seeing public layoffs in the news. Do you think legal should be a role when it comes to things of that nature? Do you think they should have, and I'm not talking necessarily as legal being legal, more as a strategic business advisor, but do you think they should be at the table when things of that nature occur?
I personally do. I do. A primary role of any legal department is to ensure, especially at times like this, to ensure that any reductions in headcount are done in compliance with law, right?
Yeah.
It's not discriminatory, not opening yourself up to liability. And we've seen some public statements made by, very visible CEOs that have gotten a lot of backlash. And I do think that legal should advise on press releases. And my advice would be keep it simple, keep it to the point, address the financial basis for the reduction in the workforce, whether it's to improve efficiency or reduce costs. But, and then put a positive spin on it, obviously, when there's a negative thing that's happening, but you can express a positive appreciation for the contributions of your team, even while talking about laying people off, right? There are right ways and wrong ways of doing everything, right? And then there's a lot that's in between. I think that a lot of CEOs shoot themselves in the foot by, just being brash about things and not taking into account the human element of it all, right? These are people's livelihoods. These are people's families are relying on these livelihoods. So I do think that both just from a legal standpoint to protect yourself, the company from liability and any potential wrongful termination claims or discrimination claims, that legal should be involved. And then again, which is not so much a legal, it's not part of our job description, but, morale is important as well. And if you have the ear of your C-suite, then use it to help build morale, even in tough times.
I agree with all that. And I mean, look, I'm biased. I want legal to have a seat at every table. I left law firm to go in-house because I wanted seats at tables, not right. Yeah.
Agreed. I guess the only thing I will add is, if you're listening, HR is your best friend. It was always my best friend. So, get connected to the hip with HR.
Yeah. Or to your comms team or your PR people, right?
You're right.
And we really should. We should, be involved in, or at least be aware of what's happening in all of those departments.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's a little outside my practice area, but I think just as an observer, I would say, especially the technology companies, just knowing the manner of your C-suite, right? Is it a founder-driven company that's mercurial, or is this a professionally run B school type management where they're going to know to bring legal in? And just kind of knowing that, I mean, that should inform every decision, I would think, but particularly when it comes to like a recorded Zoom call that's going to be leaked or something like that.
I'm not gonna
or a tweet.
Yeah.
I don't know what you guys are referencing. I have no idea. No idea. Well, I see a question from the audience in terms of morale for the legal department. Is there any way to improve morale? Do you have tips on improving morale during like an economic downturn?
It's not easy. It's right. As a leader, you have to acknowledge that it's justified to have low morale, and right, because it's not fun if your company's going through that. But I think just being honest with your team, being open with them, or as open as possible, and we're all in it together, and we're all going to roll up our sleeves and get it done together. And you hope that that's something that your team finds attractive and not scary or unhappy and unfortunate.
And I agree with that. I think being transparent with your team, letting them know what is going on. Listen, I don't know if our department's getting cut, but there are cuts coming. I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to fight for us. I'm going to be as open and honest as I'm allowed to be. And also that no matter what happens, in the future, you need a recommendation, you need, keep it, things that you can do just as a colleague, right? Oh, if I see a job opening for a colleague that happened to have gotten laid off, I can be helpful in that way. And just knowing that I'm available, right? This isn't, oh, you're no longer part of the evergreen trading legal team, you're no longer part of my life type of thing, right? Where regardless of what happens in this situation, if I can be of assistance in your future and helping you grow, then I'm on board. And I think that goes a long way to, our teammates feeling that they're not alone, and that, maybe this sucks right now, but it won't suck forever. And there are people who are going to help me climb out.
Agreed. So let me ask you guys this. You get out of the economic downturn, right? I think getting out of COVID necessarily is probably the perfect example. What should you be, I guess, what's the first thing you focus on? Is it
drinks?
Wait, never mind. That is the right answer. I didn't think there would be a right answer, but here we are. I should have expected that. That was my fault. That was a really good response. Everyone's watching and they're like, "Yeah, that's it." That was it.
Right. I'm not wrong.
Is it? I guess is the thought process. Other than that, is the thought process? We got out of it. We go back to our ways, or do or do you readjust and you take the lessons you learned during the previous downturn?
I mean,
go ahead, Eric.
It's a combination of both, right? I mean, in some ways, you always want to learn from the past, especially something, using your COVID example, like something as traumatic as COVID, you want to learn from it and apply it. But on the other hand, just like we were talking about, Wall Street was rewarding growth. Now it's rewarding profitability. In 6 months, it might be rewarding growth again. And then we have to pivot back. So sometimes, you have to be flexible and so you should learn from your prior situation, but also you have to be adaptable to whatever the present situation is calling for. But largely, I just agree with drinks.
I agree with everything you just said.
I tend to think about, how you're going to spend your energy based on a hierarchy of needs. And so if you had to cut away something because you didn't have time, rather than just kind of fill up all the surplus with kind of, I would say like performative legal work, which I think if people are really honest with themselves, there's a fair amount of that goes on in law firms. And, is it really in service of compliance and mitigating risk, or is this are we speaking Latin to each other kind of thing? I think that's just how I'm trying to be rigorous around that. Like, what is our actual hierarchy of needs such that when you have the time, you know exactly where to spend it.
Sure.
And so if that, like, let's say you had a de minimis policy that said if a deal hits these 4 criteria and it's in the US and it's under X dollars, we're not going to look at it, or we're going to have, make sure it has these 4 things, but we're not going to, if I don't have a policy like that, but I've heard of other companies doing that. Maybe you pull that back when you have the free time to do that.
Yeah, I think it would be silly to not look back and learn from, any, whether it's an upturn or a downturn, right? And take what's working. But to both Eric and Matt's points, you have to be adaptable, because what is working now might not be working in 18 months from now, when things change and maybe investors are looking towards growth again over profitability. So it's important to really take lessons, but also take what works, leave the rest. If it stops working, leave it. Don't try and force it, right? If it's working now, but it's not working in 18 months, well, stop forcing it. It's not working anymore. It could be in your back pocket if the situation of today ever comes back. You still have that lesson learned. But flexibility and adaptability in this day and age is paramount.
Absolutely. This is an interesting. It's another comment. It's not a question, but I think it's interesting. This is from Cindy. We've been very successful with changing the conversation that legal is not just a cost center, but can be a revenue generator with our affirmative recovery programs. It helps us show our value to the business units we support as well as our leadership team. That's awesome. And I've seen that myself. When I was an AGC in the government, and we also had, granted, it is the government, but it was run as if it was a corporation, and we had the same kind of recovery plans, recovery activities, and it did show value. It was very valuable, and I'm sure during an economic downturn, where you're doing collections related work, where you're doing, I guess effectively it would be mostly collections related work, that does show value. It does show legal is doing something. Not just a cost that's, maybe mitigating risk, but actively bringing in revenue into the business. So I think that's fascinating. I don't know if you guys have a similar experience or have done something similar, or have been an affirmative profit-driven department at one point in your career.
No, I'm very curious. Let's learn more about that, actually.
Cindy, we're going to talk after this. We all want to know the plan. But guys, I'm going to go through some of the last questions here. I appreciate all the insight. I'm going to steal all of this. Granted, I'm no longer practicing, but it's good for me to know. So So what is a learning experience from a previous downturn that you're going to deploy proactively for any future downturn?
I mean, when I really like the hiring process and just kind of interview. It's fun to meet new people, but when I look at them, it's just like I try to think about how there are complementary skills that come along with this person. You know, if they're a former litigator, that actually directly informs transactional work, right? Or like maybe say they were in the government, that directly informs government affairs type work out on the outside. And trying to see more in people that can be useful no matter what the economic environment is. Like that's how I think about myself, and I tend to kind of put people in that kind of framework as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'm gonna focus on, I think, in my management capacity, is building out sort of that cross training that we were talking about earlier. Just because I think it does, I think it's a win-win. I think it helps in the management of the department and the workflow, and I think it helps in the career growth for the more junior lawyers on a team.
And it helps retention too, right? It keeps things interesting and fresh, learning new things. So I would agree with that. So think, sorry, Eric, I don't know if you're done.
No, go for it.
The communication, right? Because when things start going south, I think that especially the higher ups in a company have a habit of trying to put the happy face forward, right? And all these bad things might happen, but they also might not. So let's just talk about there's no chance of them happening. And then, so I think that's something that I've learned from going through it in 2008 is that, yeah, that might be great for morale, but it's fake. And then it's only great for morale until shit hits the fan. Right?
Yep.
And then it makes things worse because you aren't open and honest about it. And even if you bring it up and, the downturn doesn't happen, people are like, oh, well, he's honest and transparent and they're informing us of what the concerns are and what the risks are. And I appreciate that as an employee, So I think that's something that I learned going through it the last time around from a management perspective that I'm definitely going to take with me moving forward.
Awesome. I love all of it. I think it's all brilliant. So guys, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to wrap up here. I hope there's no economic downturn, but I think everyone listening is probably more prepared as a result of this. So again, guys, thank you so much for your time and your insight. Everyone watching, there is a networking component of this. If you're looking to network, there's a networking button on the left-hand side of your screen. We have plenty of awesome events. The next event we're doing is in our Innovators series. It's going to be with the CLO of FaZe Clan, Tammy Brandt, and we're going to be digging into the world of esports. Then on the 28th, we're going to be discussing how to challenge the gender pay gap with some brilliant speakers from Uber. Now, the last thing, we're going to be kicking off a new community of legal leaders soon. If you'd like to join, please shoot an email to Hannah Longman, which is at hannah@lawtrades.com. And again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Lawtrades. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, guys. This was great.
Appreciate it.